With Days Gone, we see Sony's Bend Studio bring their new exclusive IP to the PS4. This open world action game hasn't had the same level of hype as some other games on the system, such as God of War or Spider-Man, and this can often be cause for concern as to the quality of the final product. Often seen as an open world The Last of Us, another game which deals with a virus which infects so much of the population, can Days Gone even come close to matching the greatness and success of Naughty Dog's title? With a multitude of characters to meet and interact with, to a story which slowly unfolds over its incredibly impressive playtime, Days Gone delivers a great experience, even though for some it will be held back by its slow pacing and several technical issues which can dampen one's enjoyment of the game. I thought I'd show some of the end credits after completing the game, as now that I've finished it, I question whether so many other reviewers have, but also hope players will stick with it long enough to get the entire experience. Set in the beautiful Oregon countryside where developers Bend Studio is based, we delve into this dangerous world full of the infected, interesting and dangerous characters. Who are Nero, and how did the world get plunged into being an infected wasteland? So let's hop on our motorcycles, hit the road, and see if Days Gone is Sony's next AAA game. Before delving further into what Days Gone is and isn't and what it offers, let's get something out of the way first. Those expecting this to compete with the likes of The Last of Us are only setting themselves up for disappointment, as although it doesn't quite hit the storytelling or character development heights of Joel and Ellie's outing, Days Gone is a different type of game, but it does offer quite a lot to those who are willing to invest the time in it. The more I played of the game, the more and more I became invested in this world, its characters, and wanted to know where the story was going to go. Days Gone is one of those games which can be quite average to many gamers, but to others, they just can't get enough. But just like The Last of Us, although not on the same level, when you experience the complete journey, it offers much, much more than only playing a certain part of the game in isolation. You play as Deacon St. John, a bounty hunter and former motorcycle club member. When we take into consideration the length of this game, the game really needed a main character that had enough depth to carry the game over such a long time frame, but also one that we liked or sympathised with and cared enough about to actually want to know more about his past and future. Thankfully, this is the case, even if not all scenes quite hit their mark when it comes to conveying the dire situation we are in or the necessary emotional impact I was after, and this is where comparing it to The Last of Us will only lead to that disappointment. Days Gone offered enough for me to become invested in its story, its supporting characters and its world, even though many others will find this perhaps the game's greatest weakness. The story of Days Gone and its characters can be seen as tedious and slow, and will no doubt turn some players away as they are drip-fed small snippets of information or find their time being taken by more mundane side missions rather than progressing the main campaign. For the most part, I found this slow nature to fit in within the game world, and even though some missions may not have been all that interesting, I still found it enjoyable simply riding around the world, going between the different locations, and slowly getting to know the characters and their backstories. The issue with this slow pacing is that Bend Studio may simply turn away players before they've reached a point in the story where it's starting to pay off. Days Gone does not have many huge over-the-top set pieces to break up this pacing either, so it will definitely come down to the player as to whether they stick with this game and how much they enjoy existing within this world. Often you'll undertake missions where you will travel quite a far distance only to quickly speak with someone or deliver something, but you'll feel like nothing has really progressed in the story, which will make you question why some of these missions exist at all. Once the story does finally get going and players are introduced to more survivors and their camps, then things do get more interesting, but the slow pacing is still there. But the more I played of the game, some of the perceived weaknesses are also some of its greatest strengths. As not many story-driven AAA games take this amount of time to get going instead of trying to instantly hook the player with a large set piece or an initial wow factor. The early hours may be difficult for you, as it doesn't give much indication as to whether there is actually any more to the game than players have already seen. This comes down to what the player is after and what sort of payoff they want for the hours put in. Personally, I enjoyed the slower nature of the game. I was enjoying the missions even if it didn't add too much to the story, but much of the enjoyment will come down to the expectations that you have going into it. With any open world game that isn't funneling you down a single path at all times, I believe that in giving the game that type of freedom will always affect the story and its pacing due to the player being able to do what they want, when they want. The Days Gone characters and their story is told very well, even if it does stumble along the way, but if the sequel can tighten up some of that writing and condense the story, then the game would be even better for it. I will make special mention of a couple of gameplay segments which sees you just riding, but there's songs that are playing at the same time as you do. There were a couple of these from memory and were a great inclusion, and just wish that there was a lot more of them when riding longer distances.
Coming home soon.
Players will of course be going up against the infected and will come into contact with their nests as they explore the world, noticeable by the huge bloodstains that are outside some of the caves. The hordes move around the map at different times as well, but then there are also the huge groups of freakers. These are linked to the story missions, and players will need to use different types of equipment and skills to overcome these, as there are a huge amount of them to take on at once. Having a heavy-hitting, fast-firing gun is very effective in slowing down the horde and killing some to thin their numbers, but other items such as Molotovs, grenades and remote bombs will all need to be used to try and survive these encounters. And players will also be attacked by Rippers or Marauders, both of whom are other types of enemies within the world. They can lay traps to knock you off your bike or try and snipe you from a distance. The weapons can be picked up from downed enemies, but once they're gone, they're gone. Weapons that players purchase from the camps can be found in the various storage lockers around the world, as you won't need to travel back to a camp all the time to change your loadout. Players can also find materials and plants around the environment which can let them craft these items and others such as bandages to heal wounds or stamina cocktails. But players can also unlock new crafting recipes, and they find them or unlock them for completing certain missions. Now onto the world itself. Ben's studio has created a very large and beautiful world to explore, and the setting fits in perfectly with the rest of the game. Players will go from more forest-like areas to heavy snow environments, and each looks fantastic, especially when slowly seeing the snow build up on the ground and other objects. Riding or walking through the countryside with the rain pouring down as a thunderstorm lights up some of the sky looks amazing, and all contributed to adding to a world that I wanted to be in. There are many chances for players to take in the environment, with large open vistas that present great draw distances, and the quality of the graphics extends to all of the characters, both in gameplay and cutscenes, with small details such as the weathered and slightly torn appearance of Deacon's hat. Facial animations are top notch too, and need to be in games where characters drive the story forward. Each character has a range of movement in their face, which conveys what they're saying further along with the tone of their voice, and as I got further into the game, characters displayed more subtle movement in their faces, where you could tell what they were thinking without any words being said. A lot of time and effort from the developers goes into having this level of detail, and the game is all the better for it. But even though the game does look fantastic, there are issues which did pop up during my playtime and have for others as well. There have been several reports regarding players falling through the environment or textures failing to load in properly, but I did experience an annoying audio bug during a couple of cutscenes where the lip syncing was out by 2 to 3 seconds. This continued until I quit out of the game and reloaded back in. This was with the almost daily patches released during the first week. The audio issue did show up in the final scene of the game just before the credits rolled, which was so distracting I ended up quitting, reloading and playing the final sequence again just so that the characters' lips matched their words. There were a few times where some other enemies near me didn't know I was there even though I was standing right next to them. These problems still need to be ironed out, and in my personal playtime, I didn't experience many more problems than I've seen in several other open world games before patches also. Playing on the PS4 Pro, I do still notice some hits to the frame rate, especially when riding around the world. The frame rate seems to stutter and it isn't smooth, which can make riding the bike around tight corners a little bit more difficult. It isn't a huge problem in terms of performance, but it's definitely there and it's definitely noticeable, and I found it more of a problem later in the game as well. Pop-up also often makes an appearance throughout the game, especially when it comes to the grass or foliage, and again, this is more noticeable when riding your bike, especially at higher speeds, so the game is probably struggling to stream in the content quick enough. There are problems there, but it doesn't stop Days Gone from being an incredibly attractive game overall. In terms of what you'll actually be doing in the game, players will carry out missions for different NPCs associated with the several camps dotted around the map. The way in which Days Gone handles its missions is different to, say, a Ubisoft game, for example. Bringing up the map won't show you a large amount of main and side mission icons for you to do, which is actually beneficial to the game overall. Instead, Days Gone is much more structured, so at most, you'll only have a couple of missions available at one time, apart from the infestation zones, which sees you rid a certain area of the infected. These zones, once cleared, will allow a player to fast travel much more around the map, but I found myself often ignoring them as I actually enjoyed needing to ride from place to place each time. When the environment looks this good and you find it this interesting to be in, then I didn't find a need to skip over the travel times. Missions will consist of mostly things you've done in other games, such as clearing an area of enemies, standard fetch quests, or rescuing others, and they become interesting over the long playtime. Once characters are developed and more information is fed to the player about what's happening with the several storylines. It could be said that one of the main characters of the game is actually Deacon's bike, which you'll spend a lot of time on. Players will be able to upgrade various parts, such as the engine, tyres, frame, nitrous, brakes, and more, and once these upgrades are slowly applied, then the bike becomes much more enjoyable to ride, especially when its durability is increased and its fuel tank is larger. The missions for the camps will reward the player with money to spend on these upgrades, but each camp is separate to each other, so players will need to upgrade each camp individually. For example, you may have a trust level of 1 at a certain camp and a trust level of 2 at another, due to doing more missions or turning in more bounties for the latter. As you roam the open world, you also have an opportunity to rescue people who are in danger, and then you can decide which camp they should go to, which will increase the trust level for that camp further. Maintaining Deacon's bike is of great importance, and the ways in which you'll be doing this is through keeping the fuel tank full and repairing any damage that the bike may suffer. There are several fuel stations around the map that players can stop and fill up at, but there are also fuel containers scattered all over the map and in tow trucks, so you'll never be too far from some, but if you run out of fuel and can't find any, then that can be pretty stressful, especially when the freakers are around. Some missions also do away with the fuel aspect of the game. Just check to see if the fuel icon is present in the lower right corner of the screen. Scrap can be pulled from the cars you'll see around and from other places, and this is used to repair the damage of the bike. As the bike gets more and more damaged, it won't perform as well until a time when the bike won't start at all. Having a bike in top shape can get you out of a bad situation, so also make sure it's never too far away. Days Gone keeps the best content for those who put the time in. Many will find the start of the game, and even several hours in, to be repetitive and uneventful, but the game as a whole benefits from this slow pacing. It takes its time to introduce the world, its starting characters, the camps, and what you'll encounter later in the game. But there will be plot points and important characters that you won't know or meet until well into the game. The game could be seen as somewhat repetitive, but what game isn't? Each has its own gameplay loop, world, story and characters. It just depends on how well they all come together as a whole. The technical issues hold the game back, and although I was mostly fortunate not to have any of the serious bugs, they are still there for many players and should have been fixed for release. Days Gone won't be held up to the same levels as the likes of God of War or The Last of Us, but as the game ages and goes on sale, I wouldn't be surprised if many gamers give it a try, and as long as they invest the time, they discover a game very much worth playing, but which almost passed them by.